Hi folks, in this recording I'm going to describe for you my critical appraisal of the article by Finkelhor and colleagues on youth exposure to violence prevention programs in the U.S. So you see a copy of the article on the left side of the screen and my worksheet on the right side. So beginning on the worksheet, I've categorized this article as one that concerns constructs. Of course, all research does that. And rates, and I get the idea about rates from the first sentence in the abstract that's highlighted here. This paper assesses how many children and youth have had exposure to programs, etc. They also talk about associations. I think that's sort of a secondary issue, and the word association is again mentioned in the abstract. So then, scrolling down to page 2, the purpose I pick up right from the abstract. The primary purpose is to assess how many, and they really don't mean the how many, they really mean what percent of children and youth were exposed to programs aimed at preventing violence and victimization. And I refer to the abstract here, page 677, and also you can see this data in table 1. I'm scrolling down to show you here at the top of the left screen. This is the sort of main data from this article on now these are percentages, the percentages of children exposed to prevention programs ever and in the past year. The paper also looks at associations, as I said before, and you see this in figure 1 and table 3. Here's figure 1 showing exposure to different kinds of prevention programs by age. And you also see this in this table, table 3, where they're by age, and the ages are grouped 5 to 9, 10 to 14, 15 to 17. And the paper also looks at victimization rates by age and high-quality prevention program in Table 4. I think this is the weakest part of the study, by the way, but I'll come back to that. So in terms of constructs and categories, are the constructs explained clearly? Well, I think they are, and they're here described here on page 679 under measurement. So here you see a paragraph describing each of the constructs. Prevention programming, respondents were asked if they had ever had any of these programs, and if so, whether the program exposure had happened in the last year. Well, I think this is pretty straightforward. So I rated this as okay. It's explained, I think, fairly clearly. But then when you get to the next construct, higher quality program, I think this definition is pretty arbitrary. So people, children, or for young children, their parents, are asked a variety of questions about the nature of the programs they were exposed to. And in terms of measuring quality, I'm not really sure what these items have to do with quality. So I'm not really sure about the face validity of this measure or its content validity. Sending home information to parents, okay, depends on what information. Asking parents to come to meetings, including role play within the classroom and programming, and programs that lasted for more than one day. Well, okay, I'm not sure those elements make up a high-quality program. And then I think the thing that bothers me about this construct, as the way it's operationalized here too, is that they have 4 levels of quality, and then they collapse them down into a low-quality group and a high-quality group, and then they combine the low-quality group and no exposure to programming in a single value of the variable. Well, that all looks pretty arbitrary to me, so I'm not very confident in that operationalization of the idea of high quality. Then you see the victimization constructs. They have several subgroups here: peer or sibling victimization, conventional crime, and sexual victimization. And now over here on my worksheet, I've noted that these are all self-report or parent report measures, and I'm a little unsure about their validity. So I'm not entirely sure how accurate children's reports or their parents' reports will be on these issues. Again, bullying perpetration is a self-report. Children are asked if they bullied other kids. How accurate are those reports going to be, I wonder. And also this disclosure variable, I'm not sure how accurate that one is either. So I've listed here on my worksheet under section 2A, I've listed the main variables and some notes about how well I think they're operationalized. And then it described to describe each of the key constructs of the study. Well, I think the population or problem of interest is it's a general population, not a specific problem, and the population is children and youth in the United States. The sample includes children ages 1 month to 7 years of age in 2011, and I get that from this description right here under methods. It's a national sample of children and youth ages 1 month to 17 years of age in 2011. But then notice that they used a subset of that sample focused only on the children for whom they had information on prevention programming exposure. Okay, the interventions, they're really not doing interventions, but they're looking at them. So prevention programming is the intervention of interest, and they have several categories or types of programs of interest. The comparisons that are relevant are comparisons by children's age and program quality, and the outcomes or dependent variables of interest are victimization, again measured in several categories that I mentioned: peer or sibling victimization, conventional crime, sexual victimization. Now here, C, are the key constructs grounded in theory or empirical observation? I said yes because they're grounded in empirical observation. There is some survey data here, but there's not theory. So I think in the future I'd like to split that into 2 questions. Those are really different questions. And then D, for structured measures, and these are structured measures, is the level of measurement appropriate for the construct? I said yes for most constructs. Now, I'm really not sure about that high quality program variable again, because they've collapsed a possible score of 4 on the high quality variable down to 2 categories, including no exposure in the low quality category. So you've got this dichotomous variable, high quality or not. I don't think that's a good measure of quality. For the other measures, what they're really doing is they're asking a number of questions and then collapsing them down into what we call indexes, and I think that's okay for this kind of data. But here's a really important issue here. Is there evidence of reliability? No. Evidence of validity? No. There's no discussion of types of reliability or validity for these measures used in the survey at all. And that's a concern because the study rests heavily on these measures. So while some of them have face validity, I'd argue the prevention programming variables probably have some face validity. Others don't. And in any case, we don't really have any checks on that. Okay, so section 3, study design. What study design elements are used? Well, I said this is a cross-sectional national probability sample. So it's cross-sectional because it's done at one point in time in 2011. It's a national sample. They say that right here on page 678. It's a probability sample, meaning they took a random sample. They say that right here they used random digit dialing, which is a random sampling method. And they used phone interviews. So you could wonder how eager children and youth are to talk about things like victimization with a stranger on the phone. I don't know. And then I noted here that there's a subsample of 75% of the total, and they've only included those cases with information on prevention programming, exposure, which makes sense because that's the main topic of this study. But I think that might mean that fully a quarter of the sample did not provide data on prevention programming exposure. Now, probably that includes youth under age 5, which makes sense. They interviewed 10 to 17-year-olds and parents of younger children over the phone. And in terms of measures, they created indices from multiple items, which I think is okay for the most part. Is the study design appropriate for the central questions? Yes, I think so. Wouldn't have given it to you otherwise. It's not perfect, but it is appropriate for questions about rates and associations. So it's particularly appropriate for the question about exposure to prevention programming. Again, not ideal, but appropriate. And for looking at associations between measures of age and some other things, okay. However, the cross-sectional data are not appropriate for predictions, and they do use the word prediction in the article. Here it is at the bottom of page 679. Now, I think they're using prediction in a statistical sense here. They know they're not predicting from one point in time to another, but this is not an appropriate design for predictions. Okay, so I do complete the section on rates and trends because that's mainly what this is about. And the questions are, is it clear what the data points represent? It is clear to me, and Table 1, I think, is the best example of this. So what's being counted is exposure to prevention programs in the past year and ever in a lifetime. And Table 1 really presents that data. So these are simple rates, percentages, ever exposed to any prevention program. 65% of children 5 to 17 years of age have been exposed to one or more of these prevention programs, and 55% have been exposed in the last year. Okay, that's clear to me. I think that's very straightforward. And then you get percentages for specific kinds of programs, all good. If proportions are used, and they are used here, they're percentages, what is the numerator? Well, the numerator is the number of children exposed to each kind of program, and the denominator is the total number of valid responses, number of children in the analysis. The authors note that this is a weighted analysis, and that means they've just adjusted the data for random sampling methods and non-response, the fact that some people didn't respond to questions. That's appropriate. I don't expect you to understand that in any kind of detail. If percentage change is reported, are the base rates clear? They have not talked about any percent changes, so that's not applicable here. Are you confident in the accuracy of the data? Well, I'm not sure about the reliability or validity of data from phone interviews with 10-year-olds. There are issues of their comprehension and recall of information, especially on the details of programs, details that went into the author's creation of a variable of high quality. So I rated that unclear. I'm not going to say no, the data aren't accurate, but I'm also not going to say yes, they are. If graphs are used, are the scales, the axes of the graphs, meaningful? Well, I think this is also unclear, and here I'm looking at Figure 1, which is a main analysis in this study. Now, Figure 1 is showing cross-sectional data for different age groups. So all this data is collected at one point in time, and I think this graphic could be misinterpreted. It looks like we're seeing trends over time as kids grow from 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 and upward. But that is not what it's showing us. It's showing us rates of program exposure for 5-year-olds in 2011, for 6-year-olds in 2011, for 7-year-olds in 2011. So there is no change over time that's being assessed here. Now, I mean, I would I think that technically it would be more accurate to show this as in terms of bars, not lines. These lines look like change over time, but I understand that bars would be much harder to look at. But I do think people could misread this graphic. And also the problem here is that differences between 5-year-olds and 15-year-olds are confounded or mixed with differences in the length of time that these children are exposed to programs. So it's not clear what these differences mean. So there's a 10-year difference, of course, between 5-year-olds and 15-year-olds. So is it that program exposure increases as children get older, or is it that 15-year-olds are exposed to more different kinds of programs? We really can't tell from this analysis at all. You just don't know that. So this is a little difficult to interpret for me anyway. Okay, so I'm saying that the meaningfulness of this graphic is unclear. D, are relevant observations included and not omitted? Again, unclear. I'm not sure why we're missing 25% of the data. I do understand that we are excluding children under age 5, but I'd like to understand that a little better. E, are the comparisons fair based on comparable data? Again, I think that's unclear. For the reasons I mentioned above, figure 1 could be misinterpreted. It's cross-sectional data comparing age groups. It's not longitudinal data tracking changes as children age. Is uncertainty relevant, and if so, is it adequately addressed with confidence intervals? Yes, it absolutely is relevant. We're estimating percentages from a large national sample, and they should be showing us confidence intervals, as you can see in another video you had for this class, and we're just simply not seeing that. So the data are being presented with far more precision than is warranted here. So we should be seeing confidence intervals around these estimates. Okay, and then for conclusions, are the conclusions supported by sound logic? I said I cheated here and I used an answer that wasn't given to me. I said mostly. I think the logic of the main analysis shown particularly in Table 1 is pretty clear. And I think this is useful. So it's useful to know what proportion of children are exposed to these kinds of programs. That's fine. But as you know, I'm not confident about the logic that went into the creation of the high-quality program variables. Most of the other analyses seem okay, except for Table 4. I think I have a real problem with Table 4. At the bottom here, where they're looking at relationships between different types of victimization and ages and high-quality program. I think there's way too manipulation, statistical manipulation of questionable quality data in this table. I suspect that they did a lot of analysis before coming up with this table, and they've omitted quite a bit of it. For instance, I'm sure they would have looked at whether exposure to any kinds of programs was related to victimization. So they would have looked at any program exposure related to these columns in Table 4, and they would have looked at specific program exposure, that is the categories of programs we've seen in Table 1, the topics. I'm sure they looked at in relation to victimization, and that's not reported. I assume it's not reported because the results were not statistically significant. What we see instead are some age and high-quality program analyses, some of which are significant, but I'm not at all confident in this data. So I don't put any stock in Table 4. Table 1, on the other hand, I think is probably worth paying attention to. Are the conclusions supported by credible evidence? Well, I think this is unclear because there's no evidence of reliability or validity of these measures. I conclude that the overall rates and trends, greater exposure to prevention programs with age or time seems reasonable, but confidence intervals would be useful to better understand uncertainty in these estimates. And again, I'm not at all confident in this idea of high quality programs. See our relevant comparisons available. The age comparisons are okay. The high quality comparison, nope. Are other explanations plausible? Yes, and here I'm reiterating my concern that age-related differences to changes in programming exposure over time could relate to age of the children, could also relate to age differences in the targeting of programs. That is, that 15-year-olds get different interventions than 5-year-olds. So a conclusion here is that more robust data on this topic, particularly on age-related trends, could be provided by longitudinal data that followed children from ages 5 to, well, I should say, age 17 in the study. Okay, this is my reading of the study. Again, I think critical appraisal is best done in pairs or teams because this is hard to do, but that's my take on it. Thanks for listening.